So this is a coaching methodology ebook that I've created during lockdown. Um, Hopefully this will give you an insight into my own coaching and illustration of how I view, plan, approach, and reflect within the coaching environment. I'm always humble enough to credit other people's work, so if you do see credit and copyright, it's just to give some people the acknowledgement they deserve in terms of what they've created. It's been a personal project for my own development as a coach. I've spent countless hours over the last few months to create all these resources, principles, and key messages, again, that define my own coaching. I've attempted to be as objective as possible, having supporting literature behind key messages. I totally understand that there could be other alternative methods and principles that I could have included, and some that you might disagree with, and that's okay. We're all here, and obviously, the complexity of sport and coaching, it's opinionated and it's objective, so please feel free to add and discuss things at the end. Hopefully, the ebook will provide some kind of insight and broaden your horizon of different approaches, reaffirm some of your ideals within coaching. And I'm excited to share this with you guys and hopefully have that reflective session over the next few weeks where we can potentially enhance my work and enhance each other's knowledge within the process of our thinker's box. I think when we discuss coaching methodology, I think, in my personal opinion, I think it has to start with oneself. It has to start with us and me and how we view coaching. So understanding ourselves, what's our philosophy, what's our values and beliefs, are they inherited by our family? Are they inherited and learnt by external factors that we've experienced through life? Understanding how we view coaching and what kind of principles we want to relate to our players. Secondly, knowing the person you have in front of you, not the player but the person, what their motivations are, what their likes, what their dislikes, what their values and beliefs are. Do they match ours as a coach, as a person? In that environment, how can we influence those players? Then we go into the player. How can we then influence that player tactically, physically, socially, experience and knowledge? Then we talk about potential and how we can then collate all those things we previously spoke about and enhance someone's potential, and understanding that every person and player's potential differs. We can't put everyone on the same ideal of where they're going to reach. And having the foresight, understanding that these things take time, so we need to build relationships, build our lines of communication with players, understanding their interest and dislikes, their availability, and how we can reach them. Is it through WhatsApp? Is it through practical sessions? Is it by phone call? Is it by a video message, a video call? And building that trust. And I think these things take time. Important factor is that we listen to our players, not only through words, but also observing them, understanding how they behave, their mannerisms, their personality, to get the best out of them. We discuss things in a formal manner. We have those assessments a couple times a year. We have those informal discussions and chats during sessions when there's water breaks, and getting the most out of our players, personality wise and socially wise, to reach their potential as a player within that environment. And the last important factor of oneself in this process is reflection, and always reflecting on our processes and everything that we do in our environments, in terms of getting feedback from parents, in terms of feedback from players, other coaches, head of coaching, to make the best environment we possibly can for our players, to reach their objectives and their potential. Now we talk about the environment who we're coaching and how we translate theory into practice and practice into theory, and embodying those concepts into our environment to best meet the needs of our players. Then we're focusing more about how are we coaching, what kind of skill acquisition theories and concepts do we use and adapt as tools within that environment to enhance learning and development opportunities, to build players, not use them. Do our practices lead on learning and development? Do our plans and practices, communications and reflections build on and enrich learning within our environments? And how does that look? How does that feel for players? Do our strategies that we use during coaching interactions structure learning? Do activities and behavioural strategies used support engagement and learning? Are players best supported in that environment to get the best out of them? Then we've got to focus on what are we coaching, what kind of content, what kind of theory and concepts and methodology are we putting in place in terms of coaching, in terms of tactical and psychosocial theories do we put to build players in terms of sport specific performance model. focus on the best principles behind best practices for the best outcome for our players, focusing short term or long term. Then as we go around the circle in terms of goal formation, we've got to then focus on whose needs are we trying to fulfill here, individual, team, or unit. What kind of tactics or strategies are we trying to implement within our curriculum? Is that curriculum led by the club or the organisation, or is it coach led? We've got to consider all these things in terms of who we're coaching, how we're coaching, and what we're coaching. That all influence our practices to lead on learning and development for our players. Hopefully, as we progress through this ebook, it'll give you an indication and insight into how I adapt my environment in terms of what I've put forward now, in terms of the unanswered questions and how I adapt coaching to the players' needs. So let's just scratch the surface a little bit in terms of the environment and what I put in place in terms of the environment throughout the season, as we per se would put to get the best out of the players. So in terms of identity, having a clear set identity of what the environment should look like, in terms of being there on time, in terms of how we behave, in terms of how we respect ourselves, how we respect other players, how we respect the coaches, having the mannerisms that we want from players, not only in sport but in life. Having clear set of principles and accountability for players, having targets, whether it be game related, or there being a block of 6 weeks or 12 weeks, in terms of then setting the review dates in place so we can have those chats and discussions and how we can best enhance our players. Then in types of sessions, we can have different types of sessions, we can have different type of content, different kind of structure to our sessions. Then the delivery can be varied in terms of when we coach and how we coach. Then the analysis part and how we provide feedback and video feedback, potentially if we have that capacity. Then that reflection, not only ourselves as coaches, but having that 5 second reflection about with players in terms of their sessions, how that feel, how that go. Doesn't have to be so formal. Having individual meetings if anything arises during the season outside the norm, if that makes sense, and having in unit reviews during the season. When we refer to the mental ABCs, we're focusing on achievement, belonging, and control. For me, these are three essential components for a thriving environment where individuals can learn and develop. As you can see, these are broken down into sub-components where, when referring to the individual and player, as we need to distinguish between both and not overlook players are people first, which you'll see is a key theme within these slides. For me, each individual needs to have a sense of belonging within the environment, being able to be themselves, having a clear sense of connectedness to what is occurring with whilst interacting with everyone, i.e., friends, family, and families. That the environment we're trying to create embodies equality, inclusiveness, and everyone being valued for their contribution personally and as a player. From this, we then consciously influence players' relationships with having a sense of being a part of a team, displaying high levels of respect for one another. As naturally group status then start to emerge with personalities starting to flourish. We then move on to everyone having an essence of control within our environments in terms of their overall well-being, being able to highlight and share any successes or issues they might be facing, being a part of the process of the team, i.e., being we, not I, individuals having ownership over attitude, effort, and application. These naturally interconnect with control of football specific components, having a need to learn and develop different aspects of their game. And lastly, having a sense of achievement that what they're embarking on is turning the wheel towards reaching a desired goal or potential. This will be different for everyone, and therefore it's important to have an appreciation of this beforehand. As you can see, all these interconnect with one another, and for me, it's vitally important that we build on these as a foundation of our house per se, and strive to improve the cycle as we build our relationships. The growth mindset. I think we're all familiar with the growth mindset theory. Yet I feel from my experiences I've often overlooked it, but become to acknowledge the importance and influence these have within our coaching. How can you identify which players have a specific mindset? A questionnaire, observation, discussion, etc. Do you think players are born with a specific mindset or can they be influenced to change? What type of mindset do you want players you coach to embody? Personally, for me, I wasn't a big fan of questionnaires as answers can differ from time to time, depending on several contextual factors, i.e., mood, weather, time, and influence. For me, observation discussions are far more insightful to identify traits within people. I would often call wrong plays during practices, setting team, unit, or individual targets, or when the going gets tough during games, I would allow players to problem solve. We need to develop players for the future, but for me it's far more important that we develop people of the future. Success. John Wooden is the former UCLA basketball coach, who is a huge influence on the way I see the game, and I've incorporated several of his key ideas within the slides. He once said, "Peace of mind obtained only through self satisfaction in knowing you made the effort to do the best of what you're capable of." But from my experiences, it gets overshadowed by how players focus, what influences that level of effort, and more importantly, that consistency of that same effort. How many times have you had players focus on elements of the game that they have no control over, but as a result, it negatively impacts their level of enjoyment, participation, and even performances? For me as a coach, success derives from attainment of thinking like a champion, controlling the controllables and putting aside things you cannot control. Dr. Steve Peters talks about the theory of cognitive displacement when working within the elite environment, but it's something that can be applied within our own context. The theory talks about our mind not being able to cancel out a certain thought if we don't want to think about it. For example, if I told you to think about a blue elephant, you consciously think about the blue elephant. But what we can do is displace these thoughts with something else, as our mind can only think about one thing at a time. So when our players are allowing their thoughts to negatively influence by the uncontrollables, i.e. the opposition, referee calls, parents, the outcome, we can teach them to displace these thoughts with aspects of which they can control or wanting to influence through different formats, i.e. explanation, discussion, instruction, or visualization. This leading to a greater positive outcome, i.e. performance. As you can see from the graph, we have a variation of different emotions resulting in how and what we focus on. The more players focus on the uncontrollable, we tend to experience feelings of anger, frustration, irritation, an overdrive mind that is fogged when resulting in decision making capabilities, which in turn negatively affects individual performances. I think this is something we've all observed within our experiences. Or can we influence our players to centre their emotions, reactions, and concentration on things they can control, which results in becoming a proactive, impactful leader and increased level of focus that all contribute towards a positive performance? Of influence, we can then place the previous elements into categories of influence, ranging from a circle of control, influence, and concern. These range from longer term goals and ambitions, collectively or individually, where usually a higher number of reactive people tend to operate, as you can see, a lower success rate. Then, leading into the core of the circle, we have the medium term activities that we can influence towards attainment of our long term goals. Where we want players to operate is at the core of the circle of influence, where they can control immediate tasks and activities where they can do now and become proactive within the process of doing, leading towards a higher level of success. This is an underpinning slide on the overall process development where players begin their journey within the sport and progressing into an adult sport and hopefully a long life participation. At the start, players begin the process with mastering the body in result of the sports, and i.e. the coordination, balance, running, jumping, etc. Then progressing onto mastering the ball, me and the ball approach, onto learning to play with a friend, me, my ball, and a friend, into my ball and friend, into a 4v4, then progressing through a 5v5 into 11v11, and through the various stages between those, with different stages of the journey that interconnect with one another, initially laying the foundations of the house per se, and pacefully building with each stone at a time until we have a roof. I think as a sport we often observe the adult game and instantly attempt to replicate it with 6, 7, 8-year-olds. Needs to physically adapt to the environment, learn and become competent in relation to the technique through variation and repetition, implementing that technique into skill where we put into a game related environment, i.e. a small sided game, then becomes a part of the strategy with different opportunities within the game. Brendan Milstein, former Manchester United coach, talked about the comparison to reading. We start with learning each word first. We don't start with reading straight away. We then move on to combining those letters into words, onto sentences, and then we begin to read. I think it's a great example to take and relate it back to football and break it down and build it towards the game. Make children love the game first and have a thirst for learning. Don't ruin their experiences by complicating it or trying to be Klopp on a cold Saturday morning. From all of our extensive experiences, we've all come across different types of players. Some of whom are comfortable to do the bare minimum, whilst others on the opposite scale want to do everything possible to succeed, even if it means breaking out of their comfort zone. It may take some time to really know where each player and person may fit in relation to this, but I attempt to identify traits in how I structure and implement different scenarios within practices. However, having the understanding that not everyone will be influenced to change, but may still move up the pyramid, that's also success relating to them. I will set challenges in practices, purposely make bad calls, provide tasks away from the field for players to complete, not coach while they're under pressure within games, But I also make a point to reflect on these experiences afterwards within a group discussion, using Poll Everywhere where players can share anonymously, written logs, or even through a video, all of which contribute to get players out of their comfort zone. This in turn providing a stimulus and a feeling of being challenged as they individually work towards being in a flow and uncomfortable and highly challenged. Note this will take time and a lot of careful planning and patience. As you can gather hopefully from the initial few slides that I take a real interest in the person first and player second approach, I want to help and facilitate an environment that meets the needs of each person to support their development and build towards reaching their potential within competition, whilst understanding why every child chooses to participate each and every week. I'm never going to take and ignore the aspect of winning as it comes part and parcel within the sport, but I will not use it as an indicator of success or ability of a player. The environment is about children or teenagers or young adults that happen to play football. It is about creating a safe and inclusive place for every child to reach their desired dream and potential. Winning shouldn't be at the consequence of using children or a mean to determine what success is. Yes, as children, they will progress through the sport and they will learn to compete and become competitive, where winning and losing may become a forefront a lot more. But the underpinning objective should always be to strive to reach their potential and never represent, indicate, or measure the level of success with the outcome. We want to develop people, build potential. We compete and strive for long life participation whilst enjoying the journey. As some of you may already know, I founded the Sporting Influencer as I have a tremendous interest in the role parents play within the sporting environment. For a truly successful and high levels of participation, enjoyment, and confidence, we all need to collaboratively work together for the sole purpose of each child. How many times have you had a parent not showing any interest or contradicting what you say as a coach, even dictating things from the sideline? But what have we done to influence and control this? How can we expect things to change, if anything, if we haven't attempted to include, involve, or support parents? First and foremost, parents have arguably the most significant influence on their child. This, along anything else, should be an indicator for involvement within the environment. When the athletic triangle works effectively, components such as trust, belief, increased level of support, and communication all contribute towards a higher level of performance, enjoyment, and satisfaction from the child. Knowing everyone is in unison, the relationship between the parent and coach, positively or negatively, can have a psychological effect on the child, i.e., imagine the discourse if parent and coach don't agree or argue. Therefore, we can influence this by continually working on our interactions, communication, and involvement with parents. Over the next few slides, I'll show you examples of the resources I've experimented with and implemented within my own experiences. Firstly, I get parents to self-identify what type of sporting parent they may be. Then it provides an initial starting point of where each parent is at and how I as a coach will continually strive to inform, involve and support them to become better, more educated sporting parents and moving more towards the goal. I've even had players vote which type of parent they would prefer within the environment. This was done through Poll Everywhere and anonymously. We could then provide parents with a clear picture of what the team wanted and preferred. Important element of the relationship with parents is the car journey to and from practices or games. I've sat in some conversations during my time and cringed and wondered why parents wanted to overanalyze the game performances in the car. Therefore, I show a video of a father negatively criticizing his son after a game and getting them to tell me how they thought the child felt. Then we would conclude with what each person wanted or desires from the car journey, i.e. a quiet time, listen to music, space, or even a general conversation. I've also written a short story from a young boy called Ben's perspective of fearing the car journey as it was at the time. These over-analysis and negatively comments and discussions can overly become bearing and a determining factor in players quitting the sport. School of views is the 100-point exercise to identify if the child and parent reasons of participation are similar. Therefore, individually, parent and child complete the task separately by allocating 100 points among the most important reasons why they choose to participate in a sport, i.e., 20 points for a good person, an athlete, 30 increased confidence, 10 win, 40 to make friends. Once everyone's finished and compares answers, parents often are surprised by what their answers and their child's answers are and realizes that they misunderstood aspects of why they chose to participate. I used it once in the States, and a parent placed a greater number of points on his son wanting to earn a college scholarship, but his son never gave it a consideration and didn't allocate any of his points to it. It was his father's desire for his son to earn a college scholarship, but quickly realised that his son was his own person and decided to play sport for his own reasons. That may change over time, but at the time of the activity, it wasn't a consideration. His father quickly changed his approach to how he behaved as a sporting parent to meet the needs of his son. How can we best support parents within the sporting environment? We need to build a strong support network, help to cope through adversities, emotional release, individual learning, share knowledge, communication between all athletic triangle, and effectiveness. So to build a strong support networks, we need to engage in honest discussions throughout the season. We need to put in coping strategies throughout the season that helps parents and families cope with different mechanisms that happen and occur during the season. Watching children can compete can become an emotional experience for some parents and some challenging at the same time. So we need to find strategies to make it a more satisfying experience for all in terms of their emotional release, not to get overly excited or aggressive in terms of their child competing. We therefore need to have that thirst for individual learning within that environment, for parents to engage and interact with various stakeholders that provide the opportunity to learn to be the best sporting parent they can, not only to impact their experience but also their child's satisfaction, enjoyment, and love for the game. Having a high proportion of sharing of knowledge within the season, a high proportion of parents only learn through trial and error, and sometimes are unfamiliar or uneducated in terms of what works, what doesn't. So therefore, as a coach, we need to put in place that opportunity to learn, to share knowledge, to share resources that best support parents to dramatically impact the levels of support and emotion and behaviours within that environment to best support their player. Communication between all members of the athletic triangle, the child, the parent, the coach, the lines of communication need to be open at all times throughout the season, and putting in place rules and boundaries where parents can communicate with you after practices or games, putting in time limit not to communicate or email you or message you 24 hours after the game or within 24 hours after the game, putting boundaries in place that have the best opportunities for you to communicate with the parent and the child, for the best opportunities to learn and develop within the environment, for the best outcome and enjoyment experiences for the child. And finally, having an opportunity to reflect throughout the season, not only once or twice, but continually throughout the season, to support and identify parents and assess how they're progressing as parents. Do they move from a critical parent into a silver, into a gold? How do they develop as parents, and provide feedback for them to facilitate their own development? And that reflective practice is key for discussion, for improvement. Moving on to the role of the coach, for me, it has four pillars: person centered, player driven, providing learning opportunities, and being coach supportive. Being person centered meaning placing each player at the center of everything that you do in terms of their well being, in terms of their development, in terms of their potential, in terms of their coaching. Being player driven, again, placing that player at the center of everything that you do. Provide plenty of learning opportunities in there, not only tactically, but socially, problem solving, challenging players, getting them out of their comfort zone, and being coach supportive of your assistant, of being coaches within your academy, and being supportive of their development too. Within that, we have being a leader, being a motivator, management, man management, PR, commitment, teamwork, organisation, teacher, student, and communicator. I think we've all experienced these different roles and different responsibilities within our experiences, but I think these are key foundation underpinning characteristics and attributes that we all need to display within our coaching for a successful environment. These are an array of coaching styles and tools that we can utilize within our coaching: trial and error, guide discovery, Q&A, democratic, autocratic. It's our responsibility to attempt to match our coaching styles to the player and our group needs and the activity. There isn't a right or wrong way in terms of styles. Players have their preferences, however, with experiences we can combine a variation of these within our session to aid the learning and development, also engagement. I've included examples of how we could include these within our sessions. Moving on to session design, there are components that we must try to align with regards to involvement, enjoyment, and challenge, i.e., attempting to make sure that everyone has a ball, having a lot of contact time on the ball throughout the session, having different directions within the activity that are game related, having consequences to a scenario, i.e., if I lose possession, can it result in a goal, or devising opponents to add another game related test to complete an activity or technique under pressure. We want to endeavour to have every player involved, active and interacted. Avoiding cues or waiting too long to participate or listening. Can we create an environment where players can experiment, discover, develop, continue to polish their skill set? Whilst we design our session, can we consider how we can influence, adapt, or challenge the players by the size, the shape of the area, goals and targets, number of players, starting positions, changing roles or responsibilities, rules, individual and team challenges, realism or the practice? Is it fun? Does it provide learning opportunities? Taking the following into consideration, we need to consider the mental skills that occur during the sessions, the attention, the intensity, the intent. Within this, can we provide and agree on specific goals, provide strategies of self-talk? What does a positive body language look like? Can we encourage players to place themselves within the performance state, which may then translate into a game? Continuing with the theme of session design, there are more considerations that we need to embed within a session design: communication styles, transitions, managing differences within the session and personalities, the direction. Is it relatable? Is there a reward? Is there restriction within our session? Is it player led, coach led? Can we co create a session? Does it engage the learner? Is it pitch geography related to the game? Do we develop individuals? What practice spectrum are we focusing on? Is it the physical load compared to when the game or the next game is? The psychological load. Andrew Abraham recently discussed the theory of constructive alignment that refers to the principle used for devising teaching and learning activities and assessment tasks. What is the objective of the activity or overall session? How and what do we put in place to engage the players within the learning process? When and what tasks do we implement to create a learning opportunity and assessing the task? How do we then intervene? A Q&A, tell them, show them, discussion. The task isn't engaging, the learner will too often become disinterested, bored, or restless, this negatively affecting behaviour. Therefore, there needs to be a clear alignment between all key areas while continually adapting our teaching and learning methodology that allows attainment, achievement, and learning. The two main elements can directly influence are the task, i.e., practice, and intervention, i.e., behaviour, or the way we intervene, i.e., not belittling someone for making a mistake. If we continually encourage and consider the following within our session design and implementation, all key areas will combine to create some level of learning. Learning theories that can have a greater impact on the learning, development, and engagement of our players, and for learning to flourish. Which theory is best? Do we have to use one, or can we use a combination within our sessions? Coaches can deliver within an approach that utilizes a variation of these theories that are relatable and best supports the environment, activity, and the group in front of you. Exhausting these theories in practice can only facilitate your teaching, learning, and striving towards an achieved set of targets and objectives, predetermined or not. Behaviorism relating to shaping behavior through positive or negative behavior, and based on the notion that behavior can be controlled, modified, or influenced as a consequence of shaping that appropriate behavior. Cognitivism, understanding a physical response to experience within a distributed learning context. Constructivism, building on prior knowledge and experiences. Humanism, personalized or person-centered approach whereby the coach facilitates the environment and focuses on the individuals. Connectivism, forming information by forming connections and making sense that people no longer stop learning, and learning can occur across all networks, methods, and including online. We can therefore try to impose and implement these strategies and approaches within different types of practices. Blocked, where we work on the same task technique within the session. Variable, learning a task that involves variation of the same skill task being performed. Random, this allows players to discover, experiment, and develop a skill in a number of various ways, then moving on to the next. Some coaches may combine various methods during one practice. Which method is best? Again, it all depends on the type of players, level of players, and how comfortable the coach is moving between different approaches. The coaching process was a key theme and aspect within my Way4B journey, and something I've continued to utilise moving forwards. Let me take you through the entirety of the process whilst we relate this to how, what, and why we may intervene within our practices. Firstly, I've added a few elements of my own to this. 1. Not focusing too much on predetermined coaching points or objectives, as we can have unconscious bias as we seek out these predetermined aspects and ignore other key opportunities to intervene collectively or individually. I'm not stating coaches should not have any predetermined points, but be wary of overemphasizing on them when you're observing the session. 2. Whilst planning, we can make the activity session realistic. If the session needs to be conditioned further during practice, again, can it be realistic and game related? 3. If the players are having too much success or the objective of the activity isn't being attained, can you condition the area, having alternatives already considered within the planning? 4. Once all the previous have been considered, affected, we can then start to challenge individual players, units, and teams to make it easier or more challenging again, try to be game related. Moving on to the coaching process. First, can we observe the activity, action, or task? Can we then diagnose the problem or identify the positives? We can then intervene at this moment in a number of different ways. Highlight good action for players to replicate and seek that praise and shape behaviour, or discuss, instruct, or recreate what occurred. Again, relating back to the coaching style slide, we mentioned before, it's your choice which method you select. Can we provide an element of feedback via verbal, demonstration, coach or player led, or even a video if that's at your disposal? We can then progress into rehearsal of the task, activity, with the feedback given opposed or unopposed. Again, depending on your preference, progressing into restarting the activity from the same position live. Finally, it's imperative that we then reflect as a coach on what occurred, the intervention, style, and behaviour selected for that feedback opportunity. Also, getting the players to do the same. You don't have to complete the whole process at every given time. You can utilize it at your own disposal, and to the extent at which it positively influences and facilitates the learning within your own environment. Here we have a visual from Mindfulness that I've adapted where it's highlighted several key steps that individual players progress through at any given time whilst attempting to execute a decision-making opportunity. You can also show this visual illustration to parents to highlight the need of players to make their own decision during games, and if it's taken or influenced, it may hinder them to complete the cycle, to learn and execute the action. We can also take this as a method of the level of detail we as coaches need to provide players when providing feedback. What information do players need to search for? How do they analyse that information? The information with regard to the four corners, technical, tactical, social and physical, in order to successfully complete the action. The risk and reward associated with a particular decision. What to do after executing the action. What do they need to assess, reflect upon in order to support the action taken? Is there any further information they need to support the initial or secondary action? Here's a session checklist adapted from Professor Wade Gilbert that allows us to consider various elements of our session in terms of planning. I'll allow you to pause the video to progress through this in your own time. A key method within the coaching methodology is performance analysis. This can be done in the old-fashioned way with tally charts or utilising technology with video footage. Most academies now have a member of staff that records games and provides some footage for coaches to provide feedback to their teams. Again, we're looking at performance and understanding that players are performing in a competitive game, of course age dependent. With that in mind, we observe the action, we analyse with team objectives in mind, the principle of play being evident during play, any positive or areas for improvement collectively or individually, then providing the feedback collectively again as a team or individually broken down. Be mindful too information can result in overwhelming the players, and vary your approach by allowing players to watch themselves and highlight appropriate feedback. We'll discuss feedback a little bit more during the next slide. Feedback. Are we trying to push or pull players when trying to provide feedback and assess their learning? Pulling referring to solving their own problems, right through into pulling that refers to helping someone to solve their problem. There are a number of methods in which we can employ within this diverse approach in order to facilitate the learning and engagement. Remembering, how can you describe what happened? Can you recall it? Understanding, how do you think it went? Can you explain why it happened? Applying, how would you use it within the game? What approaches would you use? Could you show me? Analysing, what went well? Could you find the problem? What supports your findings? Evaluating, what could have made it better? How can you support this next time? Creating, how can we solve it? All various methods can be applied in a mixture of ways, depending on the players. But the more we engage players in the higher order thinking skills, it has a greater impact on overall enjoyment in learning and hopefully retaining and applying it in action moving forwards. Behaviour management. We've all experienced various behaviours within our practices over the years, and something that gets overlooked and brushed aside often, in my opinion. Whilst we strive to place a significant focus on the person first, we have an opportunity to shape behaviours of the future that can be applied to life and sport. We want to build people by focusing on them as individuals and attempting to appreciate everyone while endeavouring to maximise one's potential. We want to build players not solely for using them for our own egotistical reasons. Can we show love in the essence of acting in the best interest of each and every player and as an athlete, taking a key interest in them as people and their interest outside the sport? There are a number of ways in which we can support, shape and manage behaviour. Let me take you through them. Develop relationships. Key influences on learning is quality of the coach-athlete relationship. Also, there's a positive correlation between being valued in terms of continually building this relationship with an increased level of motivation. Structure, having a plan that positively influences engagement in practice and creating opportunities for players to become active participants in the learning. Modelling behaviour. We as coaches, academy and organisation can model a certain set of behaviours that players can observe, replicate and adopt. Positive reinforcement, creating an environment that peers strive towards receiving positive reinforcement from one another or strive to receive it from the coach. Consistency, being consistent in the way we take responsibility for behaviours, actions and comments within the environment, not providing any special treatment. Gamification strategies, using a game-based approach to engage and motivate, also promote learning, this making it fun, i.e. relating to FIFA or setting a challenge for players to compete. Reflective practice. There are a number of ways in which we can reflect: formally, i.e. written, bullet points, following a set of questions, or informally, i.e. thinking, visualization, recalling. Therefore, experiment with different methods to identify which method suits you. Attempt to draw on your reading from reflection, i.e. if you felt that a coaching style needs to be enhanced, you can complete further reading or research around the topic. When reflecting, attempt to do so within 48 hours of the experience, as after this, research suggests you'll begin to lose the accuracy of remembering the previous experiences. Try to view reflection as an investment into your development. When reflecting within your chosen method, try to firstly describe what happened. What were your thoughts and feelings before and during? Did anything influence your thoughts and feelings? Were there any critical incidents that occurred, positive or areas for improvements while evaluating the experience? Can we begin to make sense of it? Why it happened? Trying to link practice to theory. What was your conclusion? What did you learn? How will it impact your future practices? Finally, putting an action plan and solutions in place to polish a certain approach or improve one's qualities. Finally, always remember great coaching involves having an appreciation of people first, whilst being person centered, empowering people, being organized, positive, providing learning and engaging opportunities and experiences. I really appreciate you listening, and I sincerely hope you found it insightful and thought provoking. I look forward to receiving questions or feedback you may have. Thank you.